For more than 30 years now, Dr. Grayson has been lecturing, teaching, and providing professional trainings nationwide. Not only am I one of his former students, but I am also one of his truest admirers. Apart from his extensive bona fides in psychology, Dr. Grayson is one of the kindest, gentlest, and wisest souls I know. So please join me in welcoming him to PSI here this morning.
I don't think I can live up to all that. I think we'll just say goodbye and go home. Thank you so much for your kind words. So anyway, it's good to have you and it's good to be with you. I guess in the spirit of what you were saying before, my whole career, where I've been most interested in what helps people change and grow and be free of their suffering and can find more help and happiness. And though I've been trained in diverse psychotherapies, I've always been interested in whatever would work toward that end, as long as it was legal and ethical and had no harmful side effects. Those have been my criterion, because I think that so much of what we do in traditional medicine has a lot of harmful side effects. So I wonder now, how many people here would like to have a totally healthy and happy life? Everybody raises their hands. How many of you are familiar with muscle testing from applied kinesiology? Larger percentage than the audience ever had. Wow, that's New York for you. Anyway, about 75%. For those who are not familiar with it, it was something that was developed by chiropractor George Goodhart back in the last century, in the middle of the century. And he discovered that you could test people's muscle strength in their arms. And then they would touch on different parts of the body, and he could tell which organ was affected negatively through that, which was kind of an amazing discovery. And psychiatrist John Diamond worked closely with him. That's where I first learned about it myself. And then I went to some training with him, but I couldn't figure out how in the world you'd use that to help people in the psychotherapy practice. So it was years later, after Roger Callahan, a psychologist in California, had been studying acupuncture and studying applied kinesiology and muscle testing, that he thought, boy, this is something that could really help people with psychological issues as well. And he's the one that transformed it over for our use in the mental health field. Anyway, what we discovered there from his work is that if you know from your innermost wisdom a statement to be true, your arm becomes very strong. And if you know from your innermost wisdom a statement to be false, your arm just goes very weak. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, in my field of psychotherapy, or even psychoanalysis, there's always been, like Sigmund Freud, he made major discoveries and advances for his time, and he was really the one who made us aware that there is an unconscious mind. And he was always seeking ways to access that unconscious mind. And he tried hypnosis, which he learned from Charcot in France. And he found that, gee, that really helped in some ways. And he found that you could hypnotize somebody and you could relieve a physical symptom. And then he was so surprised it popped up somewhere else in the body. You remember that? And he would try it with another person. He'd relieve a physical symptom. It'd pop up someplace else in the body. I thought, he gave that up. That doesn't work. Then he tried free association. You could lie on the couch and relax and free associate. Well, it helped a little bit more. The free associations, you get in those slower brainwave state apparently. A little more comes out. But still, he described the unconscious mind as being like this, and the conscious mind about this much up here. And now all of our neuroscience pretty much confirms that, and 95% of our behaviors are unconscious. Hard to me to believe 95% of me is unconscious. But that's the good news and the bad news. We don't stop and think about where we're planting every step when we walk, or every word we formulate before we speak it. That's all part of the unconscious mind. That's the good news part. But we also incorporate negative things as well. And those negative things serve as anchors, holding us back from our health, happiness, peace, joy, love, and so on. And if we don't attend to those, we stay in suffering, physical or emotional. That's the part we all need to deal with. And why do we need to deal with that? Because I think it's a part of the human condition. And what is our human condition? But living in the illusion that we're separate from the all that is. Whether you call it God, whether you call it unified field, as the term is in physics, whether you call it spirit, you call it consciousness, whatever name you might use, doesn't matter to me. Labels are just labels. But if we're separate from the all that is, and the source of all power, knowledge, energy, and strength, we're going to feel powerless. We're going to feel little. We'll feel like we're incapable. We'll start feeling like we're unworthy or undeserving. We'll be more frightened. What do we do then, folks? We need to identify a number of things. While the bottom line piece is I need to remember who and what I truly am at the core, that I'm part of the all that is. I'm not disconnected from that source energy. But we all learn that in increments. Occasionally a person does it with an instantaneous awakening, but those are pretty rare. And if we realize that we're always seeing through the eyes of the past too, our projections are out of our history. The meanings we give to everything are out of our history. All of our interpretations there color our perceptions, and that colors our reality. So even in physics, they say there's no such thing as a purely objective reality. So what do we do then? One thing I like about the muscle testing, Freud came along and called dreams a royal road to the unconscious. That was his later discovery, and that helped some. And dream analysis is wonderful to do. I'm not negating any of that. But it only took it so far. Still so much more of the unconscious there. I found, to our knowledge so far today, that muscle testing may be more of the royal road to the unconscious. Why is that? Most personality theories say that when the first 4 or 5 years of life is when we form our personalities, right? That our personalities are pretty much purely formed before we go to school. How many memories do you have of those years? I've got about 4. How many do you have? About the same number, 1 or 2 more or less? Yeah. Now, the irony of our human condition is in those first 4 or 5 years, we're called upon to write an operating system for our lives, when we don't have the slightest idea about how to do it. You ever think about that? And we have teachers around there that nobody ever taught them how to develop one either. And so they do only a moderately good job in helping us to write one. And we're in that chain reaction that we're all experiencing. And the other thing too is that we all have our painful experiences. It's kind of ironic that in the DSM manual they define something like post-traumatic stress disorder, and the way it was in the past it was kind of limited to some real catastrophic experience. As if only something as extreme as war would be traumatic. Now we know that trauma begins very, very early. But a simple formula I'd like to think of when I'm looking at myself or when I'm looking at someone I'm trying to help is, where did these blocks or these barriers come from? Where did they originate? How can I identify them? And how can I help the person be free of them? Now, normally we've used things like dream analysis or free association or family memories to try to figure out what might have happened when we were in those formative years. Now we can use muscle testing to determine that. I was thinking, well, I could describe it to you or I could demonstrate it. That might be more beneficial, wouldn't it? Does anybody here have a physical symptom that you've been curious about? It's persisted for a while, or you wonder why it came on, or why you have not been able to be free of it, or whatever. But you'd be curious about trying to get to what might be behind that. And you wouldn't mind others sharing this information with others for their learning experience. And let me just do a little bit of muscle testing with you. Have a volunteer here? Okay. So anyway, those few things that I test, deserve, safety, worthiness, identity, and so on, are just some kind of core basic ones that are most common for us all. that we will have drawn those kind of conclusions in our lives in some way. Now for him, since this was a trauma in the first year of life, you notice that there was not an issue of unworthiness or undeservedness there. Those don't usually occur until there's a trauma after we have language. Because those are conclusions we draw once we have language and we can think about it. And so those kind of things which are belief systems, those would come more after we have the language to express it and draw conclusions. His not being safe, you know where that comes from, that's a limbic system, right? And he understands that very clearly. We all could see how it could be that for him. And so that would be prior to language. Anyway, after we take our little break, we'll continue with the clearing and demonstrate how he can clear the effects of that trauma, which, as I said, just encodings of information in the limbic system. How we can let that go and see if there's something else that also would need to be done to complete that picture. And you can have an idea of how you can do assessments on yourselves or with others in that context. The whole theme I see is all of our difficulties started with the painful experiences, whether they're pre-verbal, whether they're ancestral or whatever. Those give rise to our thoughts or our congeal thoughts, which are beliefs. Those affect our interpretive perceptions. These three things, traumas, beliefs, and thoughts, then and our perceptions affect what emotion we're feeling. Unless the limbic system is triggered, and it's an instant shotgun approach right down to the limbic system, and emotions are right there. And then, of course, out of all those comes our behavior. Then our behavior, whether in the body or overtly, elicits responses from what we perceive as the outside world, but there's no such thing. We're all connected. So we think somebody's doing something to me, we don't see the role of my energy in attracting it. And so we'll repeat that cycle endlessly unless we break into it. And I find the most helpful places to break into it are making sure I identify and clear traumas, make sure I identify the negative beliefs that grew out of them, clear them, make sure the person learns to be mindful about the thoughts that would reinforce the traumas or the negative beliefs, and begin to let them go, because if they rehearse them in their minds, they'll build them right back. In spite of how valuable the clearing is. So you have to deal with the thought constellations. Then you have to make sure you make a change in your interpretive perceptions. And I need to see people as not doing things to me. But if they're not being loving, there's only one other answer. Just comes out of fear. And it's an appeal for love. If I can see them that way, I'm no longer feeling like a victim. So those are the places where it's most effective to break into this cycle. To obsess about it and think about it and figure it out and analyze it, I don't find very effective. But we need to, I see the kind of simplistic approach is to make sure we deal with those four different components. And then we need to install new beliefs as well as different thought patterns. And we need to make it a habit pattern. And we'll, after the break, we'll demonstrate how we do that, how we install a new belief, how often it would need to be reinforced to open up those neural pathways, which is what would create the new habit patterns. And if we don't do that, we'll fall back into the old ruts again. But if we do this, we are more likely to sustain our joy, happiness, health, and so on. And then, of course, we want to use our body language as a part of the process all the way through, because it's speaking from our unconscious mind all the time. As Candace Pert put it, your body is your subconscious mind. Is the way she saw it. And she saw the role of the neuropeptides, instant messaging system in the body, as being how the thoughts instantly communicate with every cell. And so we'll want to look at that, how we deal with those thoughts, how we install a new belief, and all that kind of thing. Well, so I would encourage you, as you go forward, to learn tools that you can use on yourself fully and completely and continually, and then share them with others, and to know that every time you're healing yourself or helping others to heal, we are really helping to heal the whole world. And I thank you for being with you.